everybody, it's Justin again from Songbirds Music, Art, and Dance Center, and we are once again out here in the wood shop for today's video. We are doing the second step of the series, How to Build Your Own Electric Guitar Body from Scratch. Today is all about routing, and I've got all these tools here. We're going to go over what they all do and how we use them to get the product we're looking for today for the routing step. You can think of this step kind of like carving. We took our rough block template from before, and now we're going to make it something beautiful. So where we left off, we had our big body blank, and we had attached our guitar template to the face of it. Here's our template that we were using. A little worse for wear now that we've routed out already, but that was attached to our block. And we've gone ahead and already routed the steps of that for you. So I'm going to put this template away, and you can see that from that template, I've managed to get this rough guitar shape out of what used to be this giant slab of wood, or our body block. Solid on both sides. And you can see the guitar shape is forming. So how did we do that? Well, we used the router. This here is a router. They're pretty common. If you are at a makerspace or a hackerspace, they definitely have them there. They're also pretty easy to find at Home Depot and Lowe's, and most people that have some kind of wood experience have a router with them. Pretty simple tool, however, this is a very tricky tool to use. I have a lot of respect for all the tools that I have because they are power tools, and I've been very fortunate so far to never have received any injury that is serious. However, the one tool that I have the most respect for and that I also have a little bit of fear about is the router. This is very dangerous if you do not know how to use it correctly, and if you've never used one, I highly recommend that you use a bunch of scrap wood and get some experience on wood that you don't care about before you try it with your guitar. This can take off your finger in a couple seconds, and without exaggeration, so please be careful if you decide to go for the router to use on your project or any project. You can make guitar bodies without routers and power tools. You know, this step can easily be done with a jigsaw or even by a handsaw, although that would be miserable. You don't need the router. The router just takes us up the next step into preciseness and also niceness, right? So the router is going to make this really smooth, very contoured, very sleek, and it's going to make your template transfer exactly perfectly if you do it right. Hand tools won't get you there, but you'll still get a nice product. So if you decide to go the hand tool route, just know that it's not going to be an exact copy of your template. However, you'll still get a beautiful instrument when you're done. So with the router here, that being said, make sure that you always use personal protective equipment, your PPE, with your router, especially because it is loud and it likes to shoot off a lot of shards of wood. So I've got my headphones here, my ear protectors, because you'll need that. You'll also need safety glasses or something to protect your eyes because, like I said, lots of little splinters and fragments shoot off from the bit, which is moving very quickly. So got that out of the way. The first bit we're going to be using is called a flush trim bit. I've got a very large one right here. This is a router bit like they all are. It's, a bit on a spindle that spins inside the router because it is a rotary spinning instrument. And on the ends here, I have a little bearing, right? The bearing spins, and what that's going to do is it rides along the template, right? So like I've got my template glued to my block of wood, and the flush trim bit will ride along the template, and below that, the blades are cutting into the wood. So if you have this set up correctly and you're using a router safely, you will get a perfect transfer onto your block of wood with this kind of bit. This one is very large. This is an 1.5" bit. You don't need to have one that big. I also have another one here I like to use. I think this is only 1/2 inch. Both are fine. It's whatever your preference is. Just know that if you use the smaller one, of course you'll have to take more passes and make more adjustments in order to transfer your template all the way through the wood. So it's up to you what you decide to do with the size of the bit. Now, we need to talk a little bit about how to use your bit successfully, because one wrong move or one hasty move can totally ruin the wood, which is what makes routers even more frustrating. You're fighting something called tear out, and that is a lot to do with the wood grain. So if you look at your wood, obviously we have grain patterns that on this block are running vertically, right? We have our big stripes of wood that go up and down. And that's just showing you which way the tree grew. Now, of course, those grains, some are stronger than others, and that's really where a lot of the strength of the wood comes from. The router bit is spinning either clockwise or counterclockwise, depending on your model, and therefore the blades are going that way too. There are a lot of science behind this, but in the long and short of it is you want to be moving the router in a way where the blades are chipping away and shaving away the wood. They're not like sticking in the wood and then tearing out against the grain. That causes what's called the tear out. And what's happening there is it's grabbing a big chunk of wood, ripping it from your block, and that wood happens to be underneath your template. So all of a sudden then you have this big chunk of wood that's missing from the body that you can't put back, and it's kind of a hard fix. You'll always see a blemish there, and it's going to cause a lot of frustration. So how do we avoid tear out? Well, I recommend that when you're doing your template, imagine we have our full block here and the template is still on the block, that you start by doing the sides here. So these little gentle curves and the sides of the body, start this way. If you have the grain running the way that I do, it's going to be the easiest part for you. You have your router set up. You can do it manually by holding it above the wood and just going against the wood, or you can use a router table, which is here. It doesn't matter, both have the same results. It's personal preference. I use both on the same builds all the time, so it's whatever you like to do. The biggest key though is no matter what, you have to go slowly and you have to take little bites, okay? So if your blade is this big and can technically go through your entire block, do not take your blade and go all the way up to your template and force it along the body, because that will cause tear out. It will also cause the blade and the router to chatter and jump, and it might even cause personal injury. So it's not worth it, obviously. Go very slowly and take very small passes. If I have maybe an inch of material that I have to get through, I may take 4 or 5 small passes and carve out, getting closer to the template before I get that sweet final one. And that is a final one, right? So when we get down to the template and we have the bearing almost touching the template, don't go back and forth a bunch of times. Just take one clean pass and move on. So if there's any variance in the wood or the angle at which you're holding the router, you're not going to make things worse by going over it a bunch. This is an almost perfect procedure. Any slight flaws that happen from the routering we'll clean up with sanding on the next video and the next step. So don't worry if you find a little bit of tear out or something, that can be fixed. We just don't want to be crazy excessive with this process. So we're taking our small, slow bites going around the wood. Keep in mind you might have to adjust the speed of your router, and there's not a right answer for that depending on the kind of wood you have. Just experiment and find out what works for your setup on a scrap piece of wood before you try this. Going very slowly, very patiently. You will fight tear out no matter what when you get up here around the horns and also around the neck joint, sometimes even on the bottom. And that's just because of the way the grain works, right? We have this nice vertical grain and the bit's doing great, and then we get up here on the top and look, our grain is different, right? The direction of the grain is the same, but the angle at which we are going around has changed. So you're going to be fighting tear out up here. I got a little bit on both of these, but nothing to write home about. It'll be fine to be fixed. Just go very slowly and take teeny tiny bites. You'll also be fighting on the top here where the horns are, that if you're doing the manual version, your router is going to want to tip off because it won't be as supported. So use a piece of scrap to support it, or just make sure you're really paying attention when you get around there. The most important part of this that can't be fixed later on if something goes wrong is up here by the neck. Right? Because this is a vital seam that's going to hold the guitar neck to the body. So when you're going around this part, just really be cautious and take your time, because that is the one thing that we can't mess up. If you have a tear out that happens on the body, we might be able to fix it with another way or something else, but this has to be perfect. Okay, so we've gone ahead and we've gone with our flesh trim bit and trimmed around the body. That's the step this one is in, and it's done. Perfect. That is the hardest part. So give yourself a pat on the back. We can breathe a sigh of relief and move on to an easier thing. The next step here is with this second guitar body, and I've actually gone ahead and finished this body for the video for today. You can see here that I have my cavities routed in the body here for my pickups. I've got a cavity for the bridge. This is going to be using a tremolo bridge, which is why you can see it goes all the way through. If you're using a hardtail bridge that just sits on top, you don't even need this cavity, so make sure you plan ahead what you're going to be using. If you do use a tremolo bridge like this, you will need a cavity in the back, so plan ahead for that. I've also got my jack cavity to plug in the guitar, and this is the pickup cavity. You can notice here in the pickup cavity that I actually used an old bit. It was the same size as this one, it's a 1/2 inch bit, but the bearing was missing and I didn't realize it. So I was using my template and before I knew it, my template had been chewed through and I actually slipped a little bit into this cavity. So not a big deal. The pit guard will cover it, but it is just a good example of how fast it can go south if you're not paying attention. So make sure your tools are in good shape and good condition before you try this step. I would definitely recommend starting with this cavity because it is the least important, right? If something's going to go wrong, it should happen here. Then move on to your jack, and then your pickups. If you're doing your tremolo, undo that one next. And finally ends with the neck pocket, right? Once again, this is the part that cannot be messed up. So do it last when you're feeling really confident and when you're sure that you know what you're doing with the router bit. This should be at a depth of 17 millimeters. That's the original plans if you're making a Stratocaster like me. So triple check that your depth for the bit is right before you embark upon cutting it out. This is the spot to be extra patient. So take extremely tiny bites and go very slowly. If you need to do your other cavities and then, take it, leave it for a day, go do something else, come back when you're fresh for the neck cavity because it's not worth doing all this work and then rushing this last step and then messing it up. All right, so be really cautious with that. Once your cavities are done, that is the second most important step, so breathe another sigh of relief. The hard work is almost over. You could technically stop there and have a working instrument. If you have your cavities and you have it cut out the way you want it to, all you need is a neck to stick on, some pickups to stick in it, a bridge, some controls if you want to do that, and you're good to go. Your instrument is done. But we're not going to stop there. We're going to make it look a little bit nicer and we're going to finish it like a professional instrument. So to do that, I have one more router bit I'm going to use. And that is what is called a round over bit. They look like this. They're kind of triangular shapes and they've got a little slope on them. And this is just giving you that nice curved edge. It's perfect because it's always consistent and you don't have to sand a lot, so it's doubly nice. That is the curved rounding part you see here on the edge that makes it look nice and sleek. And these bits are a lot of fun to use. Like before, you're going to take slow, small passes, but you're just going to go slowly around the edge, taking time to watch for tear out, going nice and slow and cautiously. And when you're done, it will transform your guitar. There is a huge difference between a rough-edged, straight guitar body and one that has been rounded over. It's just like totally night and day. So it's really rewarding to do that step, and it's pretty easy too. And that's it. That is the end of the routing process. The most scary, dangerous part and the most stress-inducing part is over, so congratulations. You can put your router away. And the next step here I'll tell you about is not router involved, and it's also optional. That step is called contouring. You might know that the other Fender guitar that is really popular is called the Telecaster. And the Telecaster looks a lot more like this body blank, where it is totally flat on both sides. There's a very small roundover, but nothing to write home about, nothing crazy. Like this is a 1/2 inch roundover, which is close to the original size. And I think the Telecaster one is like 1/4 inches. It's very small. It's a lot more like a plank. So if you're doing, excuse me, if you're doing the Stratocaster build like this, there is something called contouring in addition to what we did with the roundover. And that is here. You see on the front here, on this part on which you would rest your arm if you're playing, there's a little bit of a slope where we've gone ahead and sloped off here so that if I hold the guitar up to my body, my forearm rests there and I don't get any weird like line imprints on my arm from playing too long, right? It's a nice ergonomic shape, feels very organic, it's really nice and smooth to play with. And you also have a contour here on the back, and this contour runs from about here on the horn all the way down here. And that is a nice contour that sits up against your waist. Depending how high or low you have the guitar, it fits really nicely against your body. And once again, just goes for a nice and organic feel. Right? These are optional, you don't need them. But if you're being authentic and if you want it to feel nice and smooth, I would recommend trying the contour. All we do for that is that we mark where we want it to begin and start. My contour on the front starts about here to here, and I went and drew a line in my pencil to show where I'm going. After I have my line, I just took a random orbital sander, a hand power sander, and I went and I just sanded and sanded off until we had this nice sloping feel from the body off where your arm rests. The same thing happens to the back. The back one is a bit more challenging because you have a lot more area to cover, and it's a lot more multi-surfaced, right? We're going in this way, but we have this like concave shape to worry about. So it takes a little more practice and patience. This one, I started off with the random orbital sander. I took off some material, And then I kind of hit a roadblock because there is something called over sanding which can happen. If you get to a spot and your wood is starting to make waves that follow the natural grain patterns, you know that you've over sanded. So what's happening there is that the wood has been sanded into oblivion and it's not taking the grit any longer because it's almost polishing itself. So to fix that problem, you'll need something more abrasive. I have here a wood rasp. This is like a file, like, you know, think old-timey jailbreak videos where they file the bars. Right? That's what this is, but for wood. And this is extra coarse, so it's meant to take off and like take a lot of material off, really gouge the wood, scratch the material. So when I got those ripples, I take my wood rasp and I just scratch them out. I make sure they're gone. It does look pretty hideous because you're intentionally gouging the wood, but then to fix it, you take the sander and you go back over it, and you just keep repeating that process with the gouging, the rasping, and the sanding back and forth until you like where the contour is. This contour is pretty gentle. There's nothing crazy going on with either of these. And that's just because, if you remember from the last video, this guitar is pretty thin. You know, the normal one is about a ½ inch thicker, which requires a bigger, more dramatic contour. But I'm going for something smoother. So it really depends what your build is like. And that's it. So in this video, like I said, we've covered the whole routing process. Remember, first and foremost, to be safe and exercise caution when using power tools, especially the router. And we went over and trimmed this on the edges. We also got to do our cavities. Depending on your build, you might not need some, but remember, we have to do our cavities to fit all the electronics inside the body. And we also got to do the contouring. On this Stratocaster style guitar, there's one on the back here, and there's one on the front where your arm rests. Our next video will be covering everybody's favorite topic and most exciting pastime, which is sanding. So prepare yourself for a lot of elbow grease and sanding to get this to be totally perfectly smooth and ready for our final step, which will be our stain and our polish. So I hope you guys enjoyed something. I hope this is making sense and that you're learning something with these build videos. Tune in next week for our sanding step, and then there's just one more week to go before this project is finished. Thanks so much, and I'll see you guys next time.